There are $1,147 worth of gifts in the backseat of my car. A PS5, a Polaroid camera in tissue paper, a cobalt-blue bicycle in a cardboard box that took 6 minutes to angle through the rear door, a doll with, according to my 6-year-old niece, good hair, stainless cookware for my sister and her husband, because even then, even before that evening, I was still trying to solve problems with money. I had been driving 40 minutes in the rain. I had 5 minutes left, and I had already decided, before I knocked on that door, that none of those gifts were going inside. You need to understand something about me before the rest of this makes sense. I grew up in a house where, at 9 years old, I was paying what I privately calculated as 50% of the rent, not because my mother asked. And she never asked. She borrowed, with the sincere intention of repayment, at some future date that stayed permanently over the horizon. She borrowed the way people borrow oxygen from a room, without tracking the deficit, without considering what happens when the air runs out. My father left at 6. The load redistributed to my mother, Diane. When Diane found the load too heavy, she redistributed it again, to me and to my sister Emma. Emma cried. She discovered, with the natural genius of a person shaped by scarcity, that softness was a currency, that if you made people feel responsible for your pain, they would pay to relieve it. I watched this. I filed it. I chose a different strategy. I became precise. By 11, a paper route, a babysitting circuit, and an envelope of cash sewn into my coat lining. Not my room. Oh, not a drawer. Because money left in accessible places had a way of becoming community property. By 34, I lived on the 22nd floor of a building with a marble lobby floor so polished you see yourself walking in. I made a contract with myself, somewhere around age 9, standing in a kitchen that smelled of old grease and cold air through the window seals. Clause 1. I will become so successful that money is never a weight again. Clause 2. I will never allow my labor to be assumed. If I give, it is a gift. If it is expected, it is a transaction, and transactions have terms. Clause 3. I will never be invisible again. 3 clauses, 25 years. Perfect compliance. Now, back to the rain, the car, and the gifts that were never going inside. I am not a lavish person. Lavishness implies looseness with money. For me, money is stored labor, and when I convert it, I want the conversion to be precise. Emma and I had a complicated relationship, 2 people from the same cold house who responded to the same scarcity in opposite directions. She had married at 22, a man named Davis, who was affable and professionally mediocre. 4 children in 6 years, Tyler, 14, Madison, 12, Caleb, 9, and little Ava, 6. I liked the children. They were not responsible for the dynamics of the adults around them. I had made a conscious decision to extend to them the warmth I wished had been available to me at their ages. This Christmas, I had decided to be present with the giving, to watch them open things in front of me, as to feel, just once, like part of a family in the way that word is supposed to mean. So I built a gift architecture. Tyler was 14 and consumed by gaming with the devotion of someone who had found the thing that made the world make sense. He had mentioned the PlayStation 5 twice in person and once in a text I recognized as an indirect ask. I bought the disc version, an extra controller, a 12-month PlayStation Plus subscription, and 2 games. No note. Tyler was 14. He did not need a note. Madison was 12. The tender zone where the right gift confirms yes, someone sees exactly who you are, and the wrong one becomes a small wound. I'd seen her sketching in a notebook margin on my last visit. She'd closed it quickly when she noticed me looking. I bought her a Polaroid camera, 6 packs of film, a leather-bound journal, and a set of fine-liner drawing pens. I wanted her to know. The thing she was hiding was worth being seen. Caleb was 9, my age, when money first left its marks. He was all energy and momentum. In the background of a birthday photo from a group text, I'd spotted a bicycle leaning against the garage wall with a bent wheel and the unmistakable posture of something broken. I bought him a cobalt-blue mid-range bicycle, assembled and adjusted at the shop, because a gift that requires additional labor upon receipt is, in my taxonomy, an incomplete gift. Ava was 6 and had not yet learned to manage her emotions for an audience. On my last visit, she had found a photo on my phone of a doll in a shop window and said, with absolute authority, that one has good hair. I found the doll, real fabric clothes, jointed limbs, the longest hair in the line, satin ribbon and tissue paper, because Ava was 6, and 6-year-olds deserve the full ceremony of an unboxing. For 3 mornings before the dinner, those gifts sat against my white apartment wall, green and gold, and I felt something I can only describe as forward motion. The sense of being about to arrive somewhere I had been trying to reach for a long time. I loaded the car. I drove into the rain. I had 5 minutes left, and I had already decided. What I didn't know yet, what I was about to learn at a cracked front door, was why. Sometimes the body knows things before the mind catches up. The rain had graduated from mist to commitment by the time I turned onto Birchwood Court. Emma's house was lit from the inside, garland catching the glow in the front windows. Through a slightly fogged windshield, in the rain, it looked like the photographic representation of home, the image the word conjures before experience complicates it. I parked at 5:47 p.m., 7 minutes early. I walked the slate path carefully. Wet slate and leather soles require specific attention. I reached the porch. Emma's storm door was closed but not latched. The inner door was held at an inch by the slight warp in the frame. They were not whispering. They had no reason to expect anyone on the porch at 5:47 in the rain. Emma's voice through the gap had lost its social music. What came through was logistics, and the voice of a woman managing an outcome she had already decided on. "She's going to bring them," Emma said. Not asked, stated, with the confidence of a known result. "She always brings them. She spent over $1,000 last year. I saw the receipts." Davis asked, "You saw the receipts?" "She left them in the guest room. The point is, she's going to walk in with all of it and do the whole thing. You know how she does it, Davis. It's not a gift. It's a performance. She needs everyone to see." What happened in my body when I heard that sentence? I want to describe it with precision. What happened in my body was a slow settling, the kind that comes when something you've built your weight on gives way. I felt it in my sternum, the physical memory of being 9 years old, and an understanding for the first time that my labor would never be seen as what it was. $1,147, Tyler's games, Madison's camera, Ava's doll, a performance. Davis said, "So, the kids are happy. Let her—" "No. Listen." Emma dropped half a register, the register she uses when she has already decided and is constructing the case after the fact. "Mom's coming tonight. She got a notice from a company called Crestline about the house loan. She's scared. I need to ask Sloan about it, and I cannot do that with Sloan standing in my living room playing Santa Claus in front of everyone." Davis asked slowly, "So what's the play?" I catch her at the door. Tell her we're doing something different this year. Experiences over things. Keep it in the car. She won't make a scene. A pause. And then the sentence I will carry for the rest of my professional life, not because it wounded me, but because it was the clearest possible invoice of everything I had been to this family for 25 years. The gifts are already bought. She already spent the money. I just need to control when the kids get them. It's just a question of timing. I lowered my hand from the storm door. I felt grief first, not anger. That came later. For 45 seconds, I felt the specific grief of a person who has allowed herself to believe she was building toward something and discovered that what she was building toward had no back wall. She thought it was a performance. I had thought it was love. Then the 45 seconds ended, and I thought about Clause 2. I will never allow my labor to be assumed. If I give, it is a gift. If it is expected, it is a transaction, and transactions have terms. Emma had removed the gift from the gift. What remained in my back seat was not a gift. It was leverage she hadn't earned. I turned around. I walked back down the wet slate path. I got in the car. I sat for a moment with the engine off and the rain on the roof. Then I started the car, and I drove to the children's shelter on Meridian Street. The wipers kept their interval. I let myself feel what was happening before I started managing it, because feelings managed before they are felt have a way of reappearing at the wrong moment. The children were on one side. The children, as instruments in their mother's social strategy, were on the other. I had conflated them for 45 seconds in the driveway. If I stayed in that conflation, and innocent people would be damaged by a conflict they had no part in. I thought about the difference between victim and philanthropist. Victim is a static position. Philanthropist is a direction, a choice about where the energy goes next. I was not a victim, not even in the cold house. I had been a 9-year-old who did the math, made a contract, and honored every clause. I called Dr. Patricia Cole, the shelter's executive director, whose voice carries the specific warmth of someone who has been saying yes to hard things for 20 years. I explained that I had a car full of gifts and needed 30 minutes. She said, "We'll be here. No questions, no performance required." The building on Meridian Street is a converted Victorian with colored lights in the windows, the cheerful, slightly chaotic kind that children choose rather than adults. A handmade wreath with a red velvet bow, slightly lopsided. I found the lopsidedness more beautiful than anything in Emma's carefully curated foyer. Dr. Cole met me at the door with 2 staff members. We carried everything in. They did not ask me to explain myself. Dr. Cole looked at the bicycle box and said, "There's a boy here who's been asking his caseworker about bikes for 2 months." I said, "Good." I handed over the PS5, Madison's camera, journal and pens, Caleb's bicycle, Ava's doll with the good hair, the cookware. Dr. Cole said, "There are children here who will have a very different Christmas morning because of this." I said, "That's the only outcome that matters." And I meant it, not as performance, not for an audience, as a statement of documented fact. I drove back to Emma's neighborhood, because I was not finished. I arrived at 7:12 p.m., exactly 45 minutes after I had left the porch. I had planned the timing. You want to arrive after the other party has had time to get anxious, but before their anxiety has curdled into assumption. Emma answered the door herself. She was wearing the cream blouse she reserves for family gatherings, the visual signal of effort without appearing to try too hard. Her face was arranged in warm welcome, but behind the arrangement, in the specific calibration of her eyes, she was tracking variables. She looked past me at the car. A single glance, less than a second, before her eyes came back to my face with the practiced ease of someone who had not just looked at the car for a reason. "Sloan, we were starting to wonder—" "Traffic," I said. She began, "Where are the—" and stopped herself. Rerouted. Oh, come in. It's freezing. I came in. The ham was in the oven. The table was set with the china that had been my mother's, white with a thin blue rim, mismatched in the way of things that have survived multiple households and occasional drops. The candle centerpiece burned unevenly, one side lower than the other, unnoticed or unattended, a small metaphor nobody was reading. We sat at 7:52 p.m. I want you to slow down here with me, because I spent every minute of that dinner in two places simultaneously. Here, at this table, eating competently prepared ham in my sister's carefully managed dining room, and there, on Meridian Street, in a hallway with a lopsided wreath, handing a bicycle box to a woman who meant exactly what she said. At the contrast between those two rooms was the most clarifying thing I have experienced in my adult life. At Emma's table, the silver-plated cutlery had a faint oxidization on the knife handles, the bloom of things maintained only for occasions and not regularly loved. The cloth napkins bore the slight sheen of an iron set too hot, the controlled urgency of a woman who had spent the morning setting a scene she intended to control. Emma talked more than anyone. She always controls the airspace at her own table. School performances, kitchen renovations, a television series, a friend's trip to Portugal, warmth and humor and ease, and only someone paying close attention would have noticed the way her gaze moved, at irregular intervals, to the front window. She was waiting for the moment when the gift's absence would need to be addressed. That moment kept not coming. I ate her ham. I discussed Tyler's frame rates. I asked about Ava's current obsession, Arctic bird migration, as it turned out, a topic Ava addressed with the gravity of an academic. I gave Emma nothing, no emotion to redirect, no leverage she could apply. The cheesecake arrived at 9:10 p.m. I picked up my fork. And I thought about Meridian Street. I thought about Dr. Cole's face. Not the performance of gratitude, the actual variety, the kind that doesn't calculate its return. I thought about the boy who had been asking about bikes for 2 months. I thought about a 6-year-old who would unwrap a doll chosen because someone had once, without fanfare, filed away the words, "that one has good hair," as information worth acting on. I ate the cheesecake. It tasted, in that moment, like the cleanest thing I had consumed in years, because I was not here to be validated. The audience I cared about was on Meridian Street, and they had already received what I had to give. This dinner had become something else, the accounting that had been building for 25 years, and it was about to open. My mother moved first. She looked at her plate, not at Emma, not at me, the way people look at neutral surfaces when they are delivering something they have been carrying all evening. "Sloane," she said, "Emma says you might be able to talk about the house." The table went quiet. I put down my fork. Outside, the rain had resumed, a thin percussion against the dining room window. The candle guttered in a draft, one shadow lurching across the tablecloth before steadying. Emma's hands went still. Davis found the candle and kept his eyes there. My mother watched me with the expression I have known for 30 years, 50% genuine need, 50% trained hope that the need will be enough. I looked at Emma. She held my eyes for 2 seconds before looking at her plate. 2 seconds. That is how long it takes a person to determine that the game they were playing has been replaced by a different one. "The house," I said, not a question, a notation. "The notice she got," Emma said, walking the wet slate again, testing each word. "It was from a company called Crestline Asset Management." She was confused because the loan was with you, not with anyone named Crestline. "Crestline Asset Management is correct," I said. A short, dense silence. "What does that mean?" Emma's voice had lost its social music. What remained was the voice I recognized from the cold house, the one that surfaces when performance has finally cost too much. It means the debt has been assigned. Crestline holds it now. They will contact you to arrange repayment or a settlement. And here is the history briefly, because you need it. 4 years ago, Emma and Davis needed $22,000 to resolve an equity gap in their house refinancing. Emma called me, correctly calculating that I had the money and would say yes. I said yes under terms, a personal loan at 3% annual interest, documented and signed, below market, not zero, because zero is not a contract. It is ambiguity dressed as generosity. They paid for 14 months. Then the payments tapered, then stopped. I documented every gap, every partial payment, every missed installment for 18 months and said nothing, because I was giving them time. Patience as a professional strategy. $14,638 behind on principal. Accumulated interest. A late fee clause I had included because I document correctly, not because I expected to use it. Total outstanding, $16,211. I had sold the debt to Crestline at 82 cents on the dollar. Standard, clean, legal. I had removed it from the category of things that could be dangled over a dining room table. You sold a family loan to a debt collector, Emma said. Accusation as notation. I sold a documented financial obligation to a licensed asset management firm. Yes. That was when Davis set down his napkin. Davis has the particular quality of a man who only speaks in confrontations when he calculates that speaking will help more than hurt. He cleared his throat with the sound of someone who has decided this is his moment. Sloan. His voice was measured, moderate, the voice of a man attempting to be the reasonable adult in the room. I understand you're upset, but you have to appreciate, we're family. You don't sell a family member's debt to a collections company without a conversation. That's not how this works. He looked at Emma when he finished, which told me everything. He had rehearsed the sentiment. He was reading from the Family Logic Handbook. Chapter 1. Invoke the word family with enough gravity and the math stops mattering. I turned to him. I gave him the same quality of attention I give in boardrooms. Davis, the loan agreement you signed specified default terms, late fees, and the lender's right to assign the debt without notice. Those were the terms. You initialed every clause. The document is 8 pages and you signed all 8. I paused one beat. I didn't change the rules. I enforced the ones you agreed to and then forgot. The color in Davis's face shifted. Not flush, not pale, but the specific intermediate shade of a man who has just understood that the position he took was not as defensible as he believed it was. He did not speak again. Emma said, Sloan, we are family. Money should not matter between family. And there it was. It had the sentence I had been waiting for with the patience of a person who has been doing this particular math since she was 9 years old. I set down my fork. I turned to face Emma directly. I gave her the full, undivided quality of my attention. I grew up in a house, I said, where I paid 50% of the rent at 9 years old, not because my mother asked. She assumed because I was there and capable, and the assumption was more comfortable than the accounting. I was invisible in that house, not because no one loved me, but because my contribution was treated as ambient, like the walls, like the heat when the heat was on, taken as given, never named, never returned. The table was still. Even Tyler and Madison had stopped the low-level territorial negotiation of their half of the table. The rain moved steadily against the window. "You said tonight, at your front door, I was on the porch at 5:47, the door was open an inch. You said what I do for this family is a performance, that I need everyone to see." Emma opened her mouth. "You told Davis the gifts were already bought, that it was just a question of timing, that you were going to hold them in my car so the atmosphere would be right to ask about the loan." I stopped. One breath. "Do you know how long I have been trying to be enough for you?" It came out quieter than everything else, unguarded. I did not plan it, and I did not take it back. Then I said the thing I had been carrying since I was 9 years old in a coat with money sewn into the lining. "Emma, you didn't call me when the payment stopped. Not at 6 months, not at 12, not at 18. But you called me the moment you needed someone to carry the weight. That is not family. That is a credit facility you have been accessing for 25 years without ever once reading the terms." The room absorbed this in complete silence. This was the line. Not because it was cruel, but because it was the only sentence that named the structure precisely. Not a version of the truth, the exact, documented clinical truth. And the reason it landed the way it landed is that everyone at that table already knew it, had always known it. I had simply made it undeniable. My mother made a sound, a small, constrained syllable, not a word, not a cry, something in between. I looked at her, and I felt the complicated warmth I have always felt for Diane, the warmth that survives difficult accounting, and that endures because it is not conditional on being treated well. It simply exists, like a structural element that remains even when the building around it has been revised. But I had not done anything to Diane. The obligation was Emma and Davis's. Diane's distress was real, and it was not my responsibility to absorb it at the cost of my documented financial position. "Clause 2, I said, returning to Emma. "I will never allow my labor to be assumed. If I give, it is a gift. If it is expected, it is a transaction. Transactions have terms." "You made a contract with yourself," Emma said. Her voice had graduated from wet slate to something harder, something that had given up on the social register entirely. "You walk around with these clauses, and you treat your own family like a balance sheet." "The balance sheet," I said, "is what kept the lights on in the house on Carver Street when we were children, Emma. I have been doing this accounting my entire life. The only thing that changed tonight is that I stopped doing it quietly. You are not going to sit in my house and tell me that family is a contract." "Money matters everywhere," I said. "The difference is whether you acknowledge it. In families that pretend it doesn't, the person with the resources carries the rest of them in silence until the silence becomes a $22,000 loan that stops being repaid and a $1,000 Christmas that gets called a performance. The pretending doesn't dissolve the transaction, it only removes the paperwork." "I cannot believe—" Emma stood, controlled, rigid with the effort of not making a scene in front of her children. "I cannot believe you came to my home, to Christmas dinner, to do this." "I came to your home tonight," I said, "because you plan to use Christmas dinner to ask me to forgive a $16,000 debt. The only difference between what you planned and what happened is that I am no longer willing to be the invisible infrastructure of your comfort." A silence of a quality I had not previously encountered in that house. "Mommy," Ava's voice, small and precise. "It's fine, baby," Emma said, in the voice she uses with her children when it is not fine at all. She looked at me across the table. Her face had passed through grief, through recalculation, and had landed, finally and completely, on defiance. Not the theatrical defiance of someone performing outrage, the harder, unquieter defiance of a person who has been seen and has chosen, as their response, not accountability, but refusal. She did not apologize. She said, "I think you should leave." "I agree," I said. I rose from the table and walked to the hallway. My coat was on the hook by the door, charcoal wool, 4 years old, maintained because I maintain things I value. I took it down, right arm through the right sleeve, left through the left. I fastened the top button, then the second, then the third. Each button took the time it took. No hurrying. Hurrying would have been a concession, and I had none available. I checked my watch. 9:44 p.m. Then I turned to the children. Ava had followed me from the table on quiet feet and was standing in the doorway to the hallway, holding the frame with both hands, a small figure in a portrait she didn't know she was sitting for. I crouched down to her level, in my coat, in my leather-soled boots, in the posture of a person who does not abbreviate things that matter. I'll call you Saturday," I said. "We'll talk about the birds." She held my eyes with the frank, total attention of a 6-year-old and nodded once, slowly, as if we were confirming the terms of an agreement. Because we were. I straightened. Tyler had appeared behind Ava, hands in his pockets, 14-year-old face arranged in the careful neutrality of a young man who has understood considerably more of the evening than anyone had intended. I said, "Good to see you, Tyler." He said, "Yeah." Then, quietly, after a pause, "You too." Madison stood slightly apart in the hallway, in the way she always stood, already composing whatever she was feeling into something she could hold privately, the way a person does when they have learned that feelings require documentation before they become safe. I looked at her. I said, "Merry Christmas." And Madison. She said it back. Soft, careful, her eyes very bright in the way they get when she is absorbing something. Caleb came around the corner at speed, still at his frequency. "Merry Christmas, Caleb." He looked at me, reading the room with 9-year-old precision. He said, "Is something wrong?" I said, "No. Everything is exactly what it is." He thought about this for a moment and appeared to find it satisfactory. I said to my mother, who had followed from the dining room and was standing with her hands clasped and her eyes wet, "Call me this week." She held my arms again, briefly, the way she always has, her way of saying the things she cannot find the words for. I let her. Then I walked to the door. Emma did not follow me. I opened it, stepped onto the porch, and pulled it closed behind me, not shut with emphasis, and not let to drift, closed, at the precise speed of a door being closed by someone who has completed what they came to do. The rain was still falling. The slate path was still wet. I walked it carefully, because wet slate and leather soles require attention, and I had not changed. I got in my car. I drove home in the quiet. I left Birchwood Court at 9:44 p.m., and I did not look in the rearview mirror. Not as an act of drama, simply because the relevant information was ahead of me, not behind. The subdivision gave way to the county road to the freeway entrance, and then I was in the flow of the late-night interstate, the road wet and reflecting, and the city somewhere ahead in the dark, its glow not yet visible but implied, the way cities are implied by their light before you can see the source of it. I drove without the radio. I drove in the quiet that comes when you stop performing composure and simply are composed. Because the evening is done and the accounting is complete, and what remains is the understanding you come away with. The first thing I thought about was the table. Emma had cooked that meal for a full day. Real ham, Real potatoes, real green beans with almonds, the cranberry sauce garnished with orange zest that nobody mentioned, real effort in the service of a false foundation. That combination is the saddest thing I know how to name. The warmth was real in its execution, false in its purpose. And the purpose was this: to create the conditions under which my generosity could be harvested, my emotional investment leveraged, and my documented financial position renegotiated over cheesecake. I thought about Davis, who had picked up the Family Logic Handbook and read from it with the confidence of a man who had never been tested on its material. "We're family. You don't do this without a conversation." He had said it with authority, and I had dismantled it with the same calm efficiency I would apply to a defective clause in a commercial contract. And not cruelly, precisely. Because the only honest response to an argument that substitutes the word family for the word terms is to name both in the same sentence and let the room hear the substitution for what it is. The city appeared on the horizon as I crossed the elevated section of the freeway. First, the glow, ambient and diffuse, the light of 100,000 windows bleeding together into something that looked, at 40 miles an hour in the dark, like a second skyline of luminescence. Then, as the road curved and descended and the angle changed, the towers themselves resolved out of the glow, specific, vertical, each one distinct against the cleared post-rain sky. I have driven this approach for 12 years. I have seen this skyline hundreds of times. That night I saw it differently. I saw it as documentation. And every tower in that skyline is a contract in steel and glass, not a metaphor, a literal fact. Before any of those buildings existed above ground, they existed on paper. Structural drawings, load calculations, soil assessments, permits signed by engineers who staked their credentials on the accuracy of their numbers. Before a single yard of concrete was poured, someone had written down, "This is what this structure is, this is what it can hold, and these are the conditions under which it will remain standing." That documentation is not cold. It is not the absence of care. It is the highest form of care available, the care that says, "I am not going to hope this stands. I am going to know." I thought about the cold house on Carver Street. It ran on hope and assumption and the ambient labor of a 9-year-old who kept the margin solvent because the alternative was a darkness nobody wanted to name. Nobody had written anything down. Nobody had calculated what would happen when one element, my father, was simply removed. The load redistributed, without engineering, without assessment, until it found the next available surface. It found me. I had been the load-bearing wall in that house for years before I understood what I was. And then I had built my life, every apartment, every contract, every credential, as a deliberate counter-argument to that cold house. I had built something that could be known, something whose walls held not because they were assumed to, but because someone had done the calculation and written it down. That is the 22nd floor of a building with a marble lobby. That is a thermostat that holds its setting because the bill is paid. That is a loan agreement with a default clause I had neither the desire nor the need to invoke for 18 months, but whose existence meant that when patience ran its course, I had options that did not depend on anyone's goodwill. The city drew closer. I thought about what Emma had called it, a contract with herself. She had said it the way people say a problem with authority or a chip on her shoulder, as if the precision were the pathology, as if the documentation were evidence of some cold deficit in my character, rather than the only reasonable response to a childhood in which the deficit was always mine and nobody ever wrote it down. I thought about the children on Meridian Street. Oh, not Emma's children. I had made my peace with Emma's children on a side street 45 minutes before I walked back into her house. I thought about the others, the ones in transitional housing in a converted Victorian with lopsided wreaths, whose Decembers were organized by institutional schedules rather than family ones. The boy who had been asking about bikes for 2 months. He had not been asking because he expected it. He had been asking the way children ask for things they believe are outside the range of what they can reasonably have, tentatively, repetitively, into a space they are not sure is listening. Someone listened. I was not the generous one in that transaction. Dr. Cole and her staff are the generous ones, the ones who show up every day to a building on Meridian Street and maintain the infrastructure of care for children who have no other infrastructure available. I was simply the person who showed up on a rainy Tuesday with a car full of gifts that had been redirected from a stage set to a real room. That is the cleanest thing I have done in a long time. The skyline was fully visible now. The financial district in particular, the cluster of towers where I work and in whose general vicinity I live, each building a different age and a different architectural vocabulary, but all of them, underneath the glass and the steel and the design choices of whoever built them, obeying the same fundamental logic: foundation, load-bearing structure, documentation of what holds what and how. And I thought about what I would say if anyone asked me whether I regretted what I had done that evening. I would say, I regret the occasion I had imagined. The drive over, that quiet forward motion drive with the green and gold packages in the back and the radio off and the hope I had permitted myself. I regret that occasion. I had wanted Tyler's face and Madison's pause and Caleb's careful performance of composure and Ava holding the doll with the good hair and the warm room and all of us, just once, at the same frequency. I regret that I did not get that. I do not regret a single thing I did after I lowered my hand from the storm door, because regret requires a better alternative, and there was no better alternative available. The alternative was to walk in, accept the interception at the door, sit through the dinner being managed, and wait for the loan question to be produced at the moment Emma had assessed as optimal. The alternative was to give Emma the $1,100 of social capital she had planned to extract and not examine what she had planned to do with it. The alternative was to remain, for another year, the invisible infrastructure of her comfort. I am 34 years old. I have been the invisible infrastructure since I was 9. The wall has been load-bearing for 25 years without acknowledgement, without maintenance, without so much as a structural assessment. The assessment ran itself, at a cracked front door, at 5:47 p.m. What I found, I documented. What I documented, I acted on. That is not revenge. Revenge requires heat, requires the other person's pain to be the point. And what I performed on that Tuesday evening was a structural audit. I found the hollow wall. I named it. I stopped lending it my support. I turned into the parking garage at 10:31 p.m. The marble lobby was empty. The elevator was waiting. I went up to the 22nd floor, to the apartment that smells of cedar and clean emptiness, to the floor-to-ceiling windows that face east. I poured a glass of water. I stood at the window and I looked at the city. Fully visible now, fully lit, every tower holding its position in the dark, with the quiet confidence of things that were built correctly. I thought about Ava. Very serious about going places. I thought about the contract. 3 clauses, 25 years. A 4th clause that I never wrote down but have honored since I was 9 years old, in a coat with money in the lining. What's in a house that smelled of old grease and cold air and the specific exhaustion of a structure nobody had ever properly designed. Clause 4. I will be generous. Precisely, deliberately, on my own terms, through channels I control, because the alternative is letting the cold house win. The cold house does not get to win. I set down my glass. I went to bed, and the city kept its lights on all night, not for warmth, not for performance, but simply because the foundations were sound and every wall was holding exactly the weight it was designed to hold. Here is what I know about contracts, and what I would tell you if you asked. A contract is not a weapon. It is not cold. It is not the absence of love. It is not evidence that you have failed to trust someone. A contract is a boundary. It is the explicit, documented, and agreed-upon line between what is yours and what is mine, between what I will give and what I will not, between what you may assume and what you must ask for, between the weight I will carry and the weight I require you to own. Boundaries are not walls that keep people out. Boundaries are load-bearing walls that keep the whole structure from falling in. I learned this in a cold house, at 9 years old, in a kitchen that smelled of old grease, doing the math on a margin that no one else was tracking. I have honored it every day since, and I will honor it every day after.